Good morning, everyone. This is Annie Davies, your Senior Director with United Way Worldwide, covering the Central and Western regions. And I'm so pleased to have Lisa Cofer with me this morning. Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Annie, for having me.
We're so pleased to have you here talking about impact and all the ways that that can happen in a community, including investing in our own capacity at our own organization. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in. You just tell us a little bit about yourself, how long you've been in your role, and also tell us about your United Way.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I am, as you said, my name is Lisa Cofer, and I'm the president and CEO of United Way of Bristol, Tennessee, Virginia. And yes, I did say Tennessee and Virginia. So we are one of those unique communities that straddles the state line. So we have two and three of many things, three school systems we work with, three governments we work with, two state organizations for United Way that we work with. So it is a wonderful opportunity, but sometimes it does present challenges to be able, when you're a smaller organization, to be able to continue to cover, those areas. I have been in this position for 27 years. I was born and raised in this community, so I feel very blessed that our community has allowed me to serve in this position. And so, we have a staff of four. Up until about 3 years ago, we added, it was right after COVID, we got some COVID CARES funds that both cities asked us to administer. So we were able to bring someone on board part-time in the beginning, and she was funded by those funds. And then we were able to, through some grants, to be able to keep her and bring her on full-time. So.
Nice, that's great. And did you tell me that when you first started, it was just you?
It was just me. We actually, the finance person had left and taken another job, and the executive director had moved to another United Way. And they did have a part-time volunteer that answered the phones, but it was kind of like, here you go, Lisa, sink or swim. And I had a wonderful board of directors, and I had worked for the Chamber of Commerce prior to that. So a lot of, and I'm sure it's this way in other communities as well, a lot of your volunteers for United Way are the same volunteers that the Chambers already had a lot of those relationships built. But on top of that, our campaign chair that had accepted the position, because I came in June of that year, and of course kicked the campaign off a couple of months later, but he got transferred about mid-campaign. So luckily our board president was the general manager of our local TV station, and so he stepped right in, and we did not skip a beat. He and I are in Rotary together. We kind of laugh about that sometimes, but because it didn't seem like we, didn't skip a beat. But yes, so we have grown a lot.
Absolutely. No, thank you. And today we're talking specifically about the impact that a grant writer has made on your organization. So talk a little bit about the factors that influence that decision, because I think a lot of our CEOs struggle with, when is the right time to increase that staff capacity, also knowing that our personnel is often our biggest expense. So you have to balance that with other competing priorities.
Absolutely. And we are kind of in a little bit of a unique situation in that we had a couple of our larger donors back in 2016 helped us to kick off an endowment campaign. And we had a little bit of money in there already, but they wanted to kick it off and raise. Back in 2016, we needed about $9 million to do what they wanted to do. And their goal was to make sure that every dollar that comes in, that full dollar goes back out into the community. So our operating expenses are paid for by the interest from the endowment. So they were not interested at all in us hiring anyone else. So we knew we already had that challenge. But we also knew that we were kind of between a rock and a hard place. Our campaign, although it is up and down a little bit and continues to be that way, it is a little stagnant. as most campaigns are. We have not seen the decline that a lot of other United Ways have had. We're been able to maintain that, but about 40% of what we raise each year is raised by about 15 different individuals and families. So, we have a lot of generous donors out there, but when you've got almost 50% of what you raise is being raised by a small group, you've got to do something about that. So originally we thought, well, we're going to have to hire somebody. How are we going to do that? And so we had the opportunity. Mary Graham, who is the president and CEO for the United Ways of Tennessee, has been a huge supporter of ours for a long time and has just provided us with lots of resources, as she does our other neighboring United Ways. And she was here for a visit. And I just mentioned to her that we were looking at doing that. And she said, Lisa, I would not worry about hiring a staff person. I would look at contracting with someone. And so she gave me a contact. And I also received a couple of other contacts from some other folks and went in and interviewed those three different grant writers and felt like the one Mary recommended was the best fit for us. He is amazing and he works a lot with United Way. So he already has that love for the work that we do, which is huge. The other two that we interviewed were great, but one of them focused more on like food pantries and hunger and that kind of thing, which is great because we do that as well. But we do so much more than that. And so we just felt like that Mark Vanderpool was a much better fit for us. And so then I had the challenge of presenting this to our board. So I did what I think any United Way would do is I first sat down and I had been sharing this with my executive team anyway, kind of what we were looking at. But once we realized we felt like the contracting with someone was a much better fit, then they were all on board. I did have a couple of board members who I thought would be challenging, but in the end, they really weren't. One of our communications team helped us put a really good presentation together. And it's been about 4 years ago, but I'm sure I still have access to that. So if somebody did want a copy of that, I would be happy to share. Anyway, and so we presented that at a board meeting, and what they allowed us to do, we had built up a little bit of money in our reserves, and they allowed us to take, I think it was 20,000 from our reserves, and we set that aside for our grant writer, and then we got to work. And one of the things that, and maybe you want me to stop right there, and I'm happy to, but I do want to get into a little bit on what the responsibilities. We may not have had another staff person, but we still had a lot of responsibilities to work with Mark and provide him the information that he needed. So, but we also, it's worked out really well for us.
Good. Yes, and I definitely want to dig into that a little bit.
Okay.
Give us the kind of the ta-da. What have been the benefits and results of hiring Mark, or of contracting
Well,
with Mark, I should say.
well, first of all, he's great to work with, and the one thing that I love so much about working with him, there's many things, but one of the things that I do love is if we have a fairly small, grant, like just maybe 2 or 3 pages, even though I feel like we don't have time to sit down and put the work into doing that, he'll say, now, Lisa, you all can do this. You don't need to pay me to do this. But he will then, once we do it, and we'll send him the supporting documentation or whatever, he's happy to look over it and make sure and then make suggestions. But I love that he doesn't just say, send it to me. So that's one thing that I really love. We have written, and this may be off just a little bit, but since we started this in 2020, we only wrote one grant then. And that was kind of the beginning of all this. And that was actually before Mark came on board. And then in 2021 is when Mark came on board. And we have written between 18 and 20 grants. And we have received 13 of those grants.
Wow.
They total about $568,343. Now the others that we didn't get are primarily like CDBG, city dollars, and we feel like we really struggle with our cities believe in what we do, and they reach out to us when they have needs and that kind of thing. But when we're competing with other organizations for those grant dollars, sometimes they get the grant dollars and we don't. The biggest part of this, the grant dollars we have written, is a state grant that we got $334,000 to continue a program we started during COVID. Both city managers came to us and said, where are we going to, quarantine our unsheltered folks? How are we going to provide their meals, their medications, all of that? And so within about a week and a half, we had put a program together. We ended up having to transport by ambulance our unsheltered about 30 minutes from here, but it was a wonderful program. And so when the funding the cities gave us to provide the meals and the medications, and we work with our local hospital or clinics to monitor them to make sure that they don't need to be taken to the hospital. And we have actually had to have some folks transported back to the hospital. But it's a wonderful program. But when those funds ran out, before that, we knew we needed to continue that. So we wrote the grant, had no idea that we would get the money. And part of the reason it was so large was we had written in there to purchase a small home so that we could move folks from quarantine into instead of having to get them to the Salvation Army or to the Haven, we would get them in a place where we could better wrap services around them. Now, what happened was, as soon as we were notified we had the grant, that's when real estate prices really went up. And so we ended up not doing that part of the grant, but it did allow us to do some other things. We were able to purchase commercial dishwashers for both of our emergency shelters because they were using paper plates and plasticware. And the goal of the grant was to prevent the spread of COVID, was a part of it. And so we could show to the state, we reached out to them and said, they don't need to be using paper plates and things like that. And so we spent about $50,000 to be able to buy them, commercial dishwashers. So, and we did, lots of different things with the grant. So, it helped us to write, we've written a grant to start a new program called Ride United. And we provide transportation back and forth to work for our folks. We got the grant in February of 2023. And we did from February until December, we did about 670 rides, and then to about 15 different businesses. And then for this year through August, we've provided almost 900 rides. That first grant we got from United Way Worldwide, we did apply again, but we did not get a grant from them to do that. But we wrote two other grants and we've received, they were both 30,000. And we just found out this week we got the second one. So yeah, so we're going to be able to continue to do that. And all of that work is done internally, but Mark kind of oversees that and looks at our grant to make sure that we've put everything in there. And he's so much better. He's a wordsmith. And that's the other thing you really want to look for when you are interviewing people to be potential grant writers for you, whether it's somebody you're going to hire full time or it's a contract. It is about how they can wordsmith things, because I'll write something thinking, wow, that looks really great. Or one of my staff will, and we send it to Mark and he tweaks it just a little bit. And it sounds, like, something that's going to get some money, if that makes sense. So.
Oh, that's great. So a couple things from that. I think one is talk a little bit about where you focus your efforts if in terms of the types of grants that you all apply for, and if also there's any criteria that you look at in terms of what's going to be required of us in terms of implementation or the grant management and reporting, and does that influence which grants that you all go after?
It absolutely does. And I would not have said that in the very beginning. I would have said, oh no, we're going to apply for everything. But I think, a lot of times people say, be careful what you pray for. You might get it. And that's what happened here, because in the beginning, we just knew this is the road we needed to take. but we didn't have a true understanding of the work that's involved on our end, even if the grant writer is writing the grant for us. There's a lot of documentation, a lot of field work, I would say, that has to be done depending on what kind of a grant it is that you have to provide him or her. And you have to have time to access that. You have to have good data. The other thing that is one of the reasons that we look at whether or not we're going to accept a grant or go for a grant is if it's a reimbursable grant. That is very important. You have to be, depending on how much your grant is you're asking for, you have to be able, if your grant is 50,000, then you need, the way we look at it is you need to know that you've got $50,000 that you could spend right now. You're not going to spend it all at one time, most likely, but that you have access to that in order to not put your other financials kind of in jeopardy. One of our partner agencies, and I won't say which one it is, and they do fabulous work, but a lot of their grants are reimbursable, and they would have to have really, really deep pockets in order to be able to always have that kind of money, so they don't. So what happens is it really puts a strain on their finances when the grants are, not reimbursed in a timely manner. Now, I can say our state grant, once we would get our paperwork in, which our accounting person did a fabulous job with that, and we were actually audited too. After the grant was finalized, I mean, we had like thousands of pages of documentation and that kind of thing. And we sent it to them in less than 24 hours. They were like, you all are good to go. So that's what you want, is an accounting person or a finance person who really is going to make sure that they are documenting everything. I raise the money and I look for those grants and things like that, but I don't count the money. So you absolutely have to have a really strong person in that finance person. And we also have a volunteer who serves as our treasurer, and she has her CPA. And so she walks that journey right along with our director of finance, and our finance committee meets once a month. And so we have lots of checks and balances in place to make sure that we do have the financial resources to do a reimbursable grant. And when you're looking at a grant, if it's something that you're not familiar with, look and do some research to see if you can find out kind of what their timing is on reimbursing. And then, look at it and see if that's something that you feel like your organization can do first.
Yeah, great advice. And this kind of leads right into my next question, which you alluded to earlier, which is just about that designation of roles across the organization. And I think especially small United Ways are concerned about that when they're thinking about grants. So it sounds like if your role might be in part or large part that relationship building with those potential funders and grantors. You have your grant writer who is actually either writing the grant or wordsmithing it for you, finance director who is accounting for the funds. Are those the primary three kind of roles and functions, or are there other ways that other staff are brought into the process as well?
Basically, when you have a smaller organization like this, everybody helps in some way. And so the fourth person that I mentioned earlier, and I don't think I mentioned this already, and this was another reason that we decided we needed to write grants, is we administer 13 different programs and direct services out of our agency. And so we have evolved into providing these services. Our biggest is something called Resource Bristol, and it's similar to 211, except we have a resource coordinator, and we get over 600 calls a month to this office that she takes. We do have some interns that are starting, social work interns that are starting in the next couple of weeks that's going to help with that. But our resource coordinator does Resource Bristol and Ride United. So she schedules all those rides, and works with those clients. But she also helps wrap services around all the folks that call in. They may call for food, or they may call for help with rent. And one of the first things we say is, where are you working? If you're not working, why are you not working? And try to get them connected to businesses that we have relationships with in the community that are hiring. And then if they are already working, why do you need help? And then we dig deep enough to find out what's going on. And we have built relationships over the years where we can text, or we don't get our folks to the front of the line by any means. But if somebody calls us and, their electricity is going to be cut off at 5 o'clock and they call us at 4, then we can text someone and say, here's the situation. Is there any way you can take a look at the paperwork we have? Because we require bank statements and all kinds of stuff. Look at what we've got and go ahead and make a pledge. And then it doesn't stop there. Then we try to help them. Our goal is to stabilize them and help them become self-sufficient. We don't have all those tools in place yet. We rely on some other outside organizations for financial literacy and different things like that. But our resource coordinator is the center of that, and we are the hub in our community for those resources. So if recently we had our local hospital dropped off a patient at one of our emergency shelters, and she could not take care of herself. And so we had to help, after hours, kind of work through that to get her back into a safe environment until she could heal a little bit more, and then we could work with her on housing and that kind of thing. So we knew that we needed to bring in some funding to help be able to expand these programs, because our community is so dependent on it. And I don't know that I went back to exactly what you asked me. Remind me again.
Oh yeah, no, you are answering the question. And I think this will resonate with a lot of United Ways, where basic, skills and basic needs are really a high priority for them in terms of their impact. But it was just around, how does that work get spread out across, the organization? There's a lot more to grant writing than just writing the grant, right?
Well, and we have one more person who is a real key element to all of that. And she is our director of community outreach. And she does so much more than that. But she actually is one of the first people to look at the grant, the first edition, so to speak, once our grant writer gets it ready. And then she'll make notes or whatever and then give it to me. And so it really is a team effort. And as far as the reportables, is that a word? Reportables? I think it is. That is something you also have to really be understanding of as well, and make sure on the front end. We just got a new grant that we wrote several months ago. We were notified. We haven't made the announcement yet in the community. We're working on that, but we also received another grant from this group a year ago. And so I was talking with our finance person yesterday, and I said, don't forget, when we get this one, we need to look and compare and make sure that we're getting them the same things that they need. And if there's additional information they need, we need to, you have to make sure and mark your calendar. You have to stay on top of that, because you want this to be a relationship that the grantor is excited about and sees results, and then is like, wow, you all need to write another grant. You don't want it to be, sometimes it is just a one-time opportunity that a lot of times they won't, fund more than 1 year. But we've had fairly good success with writing 3-year grants and getting those renewed as well. So
That's great. So does your contracted grant writer, do they help with any of the reporting, or are they specifically on the grant writing side?
they are specifically the grant writing side.
Right.
But he has been very helpful in when we are working on getting that information back, especially with our state grant, because that one, I'm not kidding you, that was, I think if we had known how much was going into that in the beginning, we might not have done it. It would have been scary. But I'm glad we lived through it. We did really well, and we'll do that again, hopefully. But especially for our state grant, he's written so many state grants and some federal grants as well. Well, this was actually a federal grant that came through the state. So he's written so many of those that he was excellent at being able to say, well, here's what they're asking for right here, and clarifying some of that. So I think that was not necessarily something we knew in the beginning. I really thought that, especially since we were looking at hiring someone, that person would also be responsible for, putting the data together to report back. And so when you contract with someone, it is a little bit different in that regard.
Yeah. And about how many hours? I'm assuming you pay him based on an hourly rate for what he
We
does.
do.
And do you have an average in terms of, or have you found that he wants the promise of a certain number of hours, like in a period? No.
No, we have not. In fact, we have not spent the full 20,000, which has been wonderful because that just helps us to, be able to continue to look at opportunities. But he can give us an idea after he looks at it. He's really good, and I think especially if someone is a seasoned grant writer, then they'll be able to do that for you. I think the very first time he wrote anything for us, he said, "This is probably going to take me 10 hours." Maybe 12, but I would anticipate that. And that gave us an idea. And now part of that is how quickly you can get things back to them and that kind of thing. So it really is, a lot of it's about time management on your side too. And when you are, four people or even a larger staff and you have a million things going on, you really have to make sure that the people that can provide that information, get it to them fairly quickly.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Oh, and so, not even 20,000 and the return being over 500,000, that seems like a really great ROI, and congratulations on
well,
that.
thank you. It is not me for sure. It is a whole board effort, staff effort, volunteer effort. But thank you. Yes, it is, and I'll tell you, it's like, I don't know. Like fishing or something like that. You never know, but the excitement of throwing that line in there and knowing you might catch something, it is something else. But then on the flip side of that, I'm just devastated when we don't get something. I mean, and especially if it's more of a local, like from our cities or whatever, I'm like, what we do. I can't believe you don't invest in this. So yeah, the excitement is a real high, but then that, when you don't get it, because you're not going to always get it. It's kind of like with, when you sit down and spend a long time with a donor or a potential donor, and you've poured your heart out about the work that we do as United Way. And, you just feel like they're just going to write that check today and it doesn't happen. It's hard not to take it personally, but you absolutely cannot, because, there are a lot of really great organizations out there doing really great work. So,
Absolutely. And I think even just that's a great analogy with the donors, that sometimes the no is really not right now, or not,
right.
whether it's not the right time or it's not the right ask, but they have a higher understanding of what United Way does and probably are much more likely, to consider the organization in the future, just like a grantor probably would. So it's all about, building those relationships probably over time. So, well,
It is absolutely.
yeah, this has been so helpful, Lisa. I so appreciate it. For some of our United Ways, obviously we have a whole continuum of what people are employing in terms of their revenue diversification strategies in their local markets. And for some people, this will be brand new. So my parting question will just be, do you have any advice for those United Ways that this would be their, very first foray into the world of grant seeking, in terms of just some tips that maybe you've learned along the way?
Well, I think the first thing is, don't be scared of the process. It can be daunting in the beginning. So, don't be scared. Just go for it. Because you've got to, if this is the journey you're going to take, then there has to be that very first one. Also, look at those that are doing it really well and also look at the resources that United Way Worldwide has and your neighboring United Ways. A lot of times, if we have a question or we are looking for a resource or whatever, then we'll send it out to our state organization, President CEO. She'll send it out, or our director of community outreach belongs to a lot of those different. If you're this size United Way, it's a not a forum, but you know what I'm talking about. And so you can just shoot an email out there and say, we're looking at getting into this arena. Can you tell us, how to get in touch with different grant writers? And if you still fund partner agencies, because we do some of that as well, then, the ones that you have good relationships with that maybe are some of your larger ones, shoot their EDs an email and say, looking for a really talented grant writer. Can you point me in the right direction? And don't just jump in with the very first one. Do your homework, do your research. And it could be that depending on what kind of grant you're writing, you might need to work with several different ones, and that's perfectly okay as well.
No, that's great advice. Thank you so much. Well, again, congratulations on the success that you all have seen. And we know at the end of the day, it's not just the fact that we're bringing money in the door, but it's the impact that we can create because of that. And so really want to commend you for that and for not being afraid to jump into those new waters as well. So thank you, Lisa Cofer of United Way Bristol. Take a peek at their website if you haven't seen it to check out all of the great work that they are doing. And just another example of using network citizenship and also looking at those factors of the thriving United Way to help your organization succeed. Thank you both.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day.